Imagine being a police officer responding to what seems like a routine disturbance call in one of the busiest places on Earth. You arrive to find a well-dressed man in his 30s standing perfectly still in the middle of Times Square, surrounded by thousands of rushing pedestrians, looking completely lost and terrified. When you approach him and ask for identification, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out documents that check out: a driver's license, credit cards, even a work ID. Everything seems legitimate until you start asking basic questions. Where do you live? He doesn't know. Where do you work? He can't remember. What's your name? He reads it off his license because he genuinely has no idea. Then the real mystery begins. When investigators run his information, they discover something impossible. According to every database, every record, every piece of digital footprint, the man standing in front of them doesn't exist and never has. Welcome to one of the most baffling identity cases in modern law enforcement history. Welcome back to Crime Scout, True Stories. Today we're examining the bizarre case of a man who appeared in Times Square with a complete set of credentials for a life he never lived, and the investigation that uncovered a sophisticated operation that challenges everything we think we know about identity in the digital age. It was June 17, 2019, around 3:30 in the afternoon when NYPD officers responded to a call about a disoriented man blocking pedestrian traffic in Times Square. The caller reported that the man seemed confused and possibly in medical distress. When officers Ramirez and Chen arrived, they found 32-year-old Andrew Walton, or at least that's what his driver's license said, standing near the TKTS booth looking dazed and anxious. He was well-groomed, wearing business casual attire, a button-down shirt and slacks, and carrying a leather messenger bag. Nothing about his appearance suggested homelessness or mental health crisis. He looked like any other professional navigating Midtown Manhattan. But when the officers began speaking with him, it became clear something was very wrong. Andrew could speak perfectly well, no slurred speech or signs of stroke. He was polite and cooperative. But when asked where he was going, he couldn't answer. When asked where he'd come from, he had no idea. He didn't know his address, his phone number, his employer, or even if he had family. The officers initially suspected amnesia, possibly from a head injury or medical event. They called for an ambulance to take him to Bellevue Hospital for evaluation. At the hospital, doctors conducted a full neurological workup. CT scans, MRI, blood tests, everything came back normal. No signs of head trauma, no drugs or alcohol in his system, no medical explanation for memory loss. Psychiatrists evaluated him and found no evidence of psychosis or dissociative disorder. He wasn't faking, his distress was genuine. He simply had no memory of who he was or how he'd gotten to Times Square. But he did have his wallet, and that wallet contained what appeared to be a complete identity. The driver's license was a New York State ID issued to Andrew Marcus Walton with an address in Brooklyn. There were 3 credit cards in the same name, a health insurance card, a CVS rewards card, and a work identification badge for a marketing firm called Meridian Strategies. Everything looked legitimate, properly formatted, correct security features, nothing obviously fraudulent. The hospital used this information to try contacting his emergency contacts, but that's where things started to unravel. The address on his license was a residential building in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Police went there to do a wellness check and hopefully contact family. The address existed, but according to the building's management, no one named Andrew Walton had ever lived there. The current resident of that apartment number had been there for 5 years and had never heard the name. Strike one. Next, they called Meridian Strategies, the company on his work ID. The phone number went to a disconnected line. Online searches found no business by that name registered in New York or New Jersey. The address listed on the ID badge was an office building in Midtown, but when investigators visited, building management confirmed no company called Meridian Strategies had ever leased space there. Strike two. The credit cards were perhaps the strangest element. When police worked with the issuing banks to verify the accounts existed and were active. They had credit histories going back 3 years, regular purchases, payments made on time. But when investigators tried to trace where the payments came from, they hit a wall of shell companies and offshore accounts that went nowhere. The credit was real, but the person behind it was a ghost. The driver's license was submitted to the DMV for verification. This is where things got really weird. The license number was valid and showed up in the system as legitimately issued. But the issuance date, photo, and biometric data had been entered into the DMV database only 6 months earlier, in December 2018. There was no prior license history, no permit, no traffic violations, nothing. It was as if Andrew Marcus Walton had been created whole from nothing half a year ago. The FBI was brought in because this clearly involved identity fraud at a sophisticated level. Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez took the lead. Her team ran Andrew's fingerprints through every database available, IAFIs, military records, immigration, border crossings, everything. No matches. They ran facial recognition against passport photos, arrest records, and even social media scraping tools. Nothing. His DNA was collected and run through Cody's and genealogy databases. No hits, no relatives, no ancestry matches. By every measure modern forensics could provide, Andrew Walton had no history before December 2018. But here's where the case took a turn. While Andrew was being held for observation, essentially in protective custody since he had nowhere to go and no legal identity, investigators noticed something. He had skills. When given a laptop to try triggering memories through familiar activities, he instinctively opened coding software and started writing complex programs. When given basic intelligence tests, he scored in the exceptionally high range. He was fluent in English with no detectable accent, but when a Russian-speaking officer spoke to him casually, Andrew responded automatically in fluent Russian before catching himself, surprised he could do so. This pattern suggested something investigators had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Andrew wasn't suffering from amnesia in the traditional sense. He'd been conditioned, his memory deliberately suppressed or compartmentalized. Agent Rodriguez had seen this before in cases involving intelligence operatives and deep cover assets. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted, and their assessment supported this theory. Andrew showed markers consistent with someone who'd undergone intensive psychological conditioning, possibly including hypnosis and pharmaceutical intervention. The investigation expanded internationally. If Andrew was an intelligence asset, whose was he? The Russian language fluency was a clue. The FBI contacted counterintelligence divisions and began exploring whether Andrew might be connected to foreign intelligence services. What they discovered was a program they'd been aware of but never fully penetrated, a Russian operation creating deep cover illegals with completely fabricated Western identities. These weren't traditional spies. They were sleeper agents, embedded in American society with sophisticated false identities, living normal lives until activated for specific operations. The identity creation was extraordinarily thorough, real documents inserted into real databases through cyber infiltration and corrupted insiders. The individuals themselves were often kept unaware of their true purpose through psychological conditioning, living genuinely as their cover identity until triggered. The breakthrough came when a CIA analyst recognized the pattern of Andrew's credit card purchases. They matched a known signature of Russian illegal support networks, small purchases at specific vendors that served as communication checkpoints. By tracking these patterns, intelligence agencies identified 3 other individuals in the United States with similar impossible identity backgrounds. Andrew himself, through months of careful deprogramming work with specialists, began recovering fragmented memories. His real name appeared to be Alexei Volkov. He'd been recruited from a technical university in Moscow at age 22, trained extensively in computer science and social engineering, and then subjected to a program that essentially erased his original identity and implanted the Andrew Walton persona. He'd been living in New York for 6 months, working freelance coding jobs, waiting for activation that apparently never came. The current theory is that something went wrong with the conditioning. The psychological walls that were supposed to keep Alexei suppressed and Andrew dominant started breaking down. The confusion and terror he experienced in Times Square was essentially 2 identities colliding, neither fully in control. He'd gone to Times Square, a crowded public place, instinctively seeking help even though he didn't consciously know what was wrong. The case had massive intelligence implications. It confirmed that foreign services had successfully penetrated U.S. databases deeply enough to create legitimate-seeming identities. It revealed that an unknown number of similar assets might be living in American cities. And it demonstrated vulnerabilities in identity verification systems that everyone had assumed were secure. As for Andrew, or Alexei, his fate is classified. He's believed to be in protective custody, cooperating with counterintelligence operations to identify others in the program. He can't return to Russia, where he'd face charges of defection. He can't live freely in America under either identity, both are compromised. He exists in a strange limbo, a man with 2 names and no life. The public never knew the full story. The incident was reported as a medical amnesia case, resolved when family was located. But within intelligence and law enforcement communities, the Times Square case became a watershed moment, proof that identity itself could no longer be taken at face value. This has been Crime Scout, True Stories. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about who committed a crime, but about who people really are. In a world where identity can be manufactured and memory can be manipulated, the question of what makes us real becomes more complicated than ever. Subscribe for more cases that expose the hidden realities behind everyday mysteries.